I've got this book, which is the Tilling the Buttons Make It Simple book, and I'm going to make the Safiya trousers. And according to this, cutting time 20 minutes, sewing time 1 hour 15 minutes. It doesn't come with pockets, but there is a separate, if I can find it, oh, just ripped the page. There is separate instructions to make the pockets, and as you can see here, it says an extra 20 minutes. So under 2 hours I should have a proper functioning pair of trousers. Let's see, I'm going to set my timer and check on my phone how long it takes me to actually make these trousers. If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that making trousers is my most difficult sewing task ever, just down to the fit. So I'm hoping these are going to work, but I am not holding my breath, so stay tuned to see how I got on. I made a video on my channel recently called 25 sewing things that you don't need in 2024. One of those being a cutting table. And there was a lot of uproar in that video in general anyway from people in the comments. But I obviously don't have a cutting table, as you can see. I'm using my dining room table, and our dining room leads through to our conservatory where I sew. The alternative for this for me is to go through to the living room and to have the fabric on the floor. So my knees were not up to it that day. The dining room table is not the correct height. I know you can put things under the legs like risers, but it's our dining room and we use it multiple times a day for meals. We sit down as a family. So it's not something like as an occasional use where I'm going to put some clumpy things under the legs. So it's not the best height. And some of these angles did make me overreach a little bit, which I did regret, but it's just my way around it. If you look closely at this pattern piece, you'll see that I've made a couple of amendments to it. I've added about 1 inch to the back rise, just to add onto that back crotch seam, and I haven't added anything onto the side seam. It tapers in, just adding that extra length. I'll explain more about that later on in the video. And the piece I'm cutting out now, near that bit there, I have shortened it because these trousers are sort of, I guess, they're kind of ankle length or just below the ankle length. Being 5'3", they were a funny length for me. So I've taken about 2.5 to 3 inches length out of them to make them more into a crop trouser. But the pattern doesn't necessarily say that. So you can have these as a longer trouser part. I thought I'd just explain why it looks a bit different. Start the sewing now. Apparently pockets should take 20 minutes, but I have to overlock things. So I'm going to set the stopwatch. Oh, I'm getting so much reflection. Let's have a look. See that? Just started. I bought this overlocker for second hand from a sewing shop, which is about an hour's drive from where I live, 10 years ago. So I would say it's fairly old now. I mean, obviously, who knows how old it was then, but it's not great, shall we say. It's a Jaguar one. It's quite easy to thread up when you have to change the threads, which I did on this one. I had different colour spools, so I changed them all to grey. The only thing, I don't know if anyone else has this as well, the hardest part of threading my overlocker is actually threading the twin needle. I did have some overlocker thread which I bought from Lidl a few years ago. Well, actually, when I first got the overlocker, I think I still have the same spools. They were like 10 years ago. And they're so fluffy on the thread that you just can't get it through. So the grey thread that I've got here is a better quality, but it's still really tricky. And I think the only way to get an overlocker which has a needle threader is to get one of those air threading overlockers, which I think is well over £1,000. I don't know about you, what you use yours for, if you have one, your overlocker or your serger. I basically just use it to finish off seams. It has 2 settings on it. I just kind of leave it. So I think it's actually set up for jersey fabric. So it's a bit tight because I'm doing a viscose fabric on this, and I think I should have loosened it off, but I was being lazy and didn't want to test it out and see what was right or not. So you'll see after each piece that I sew, I'm then sort of pulling the thread straight, which is probably not great because I'm probably stretching the fabric out, and I'm sure someone will comment on this down below the video. But yes, this is just being lazy sewist and just knowing, I probably should have just changed it to a looser stitch, but I do iron all the pieces in between, which then flattens the seam out, but they are a bit scrunched up, shall we say. So 14 minutes and 9 seconds, though I haven't really started on my sewing machine at all. This is just purely putting the pieces together and overlocking the edges and just checking all the pocket placements and that kind of thing. It does tell you to put the pocket, I think it's 7 centimetres from the top. So I do get my ruler out and check, because although I've notched the pieces, the pattern then tells you to overlock the edges, which of course covers up any notches. So you can't see where the notch is, if you understand. So I had to go back and have a look where the notches were and put a tailor's chalk line and a pin just horizontally, so I knew where the notch was going, where it should be. It seems like you're putting the notch in and then you can't see it, so it's a little bit annoying and a little bit pointless. So I always go and just double check, and it's always worth doing that with the pattern pieces anyway, just checking them with the original, because if the pocket is too low down, when you fold the waistband over, it won't catch the top of the pocket, and then your pocket will just be hanging down and it won't be secured in place. So I would just check that. I'm using pins, which is quite unusual because lately I have just used those clips, if you know what I mean, those little tiny clips. A lot of people use them who make bags, and that's usually my go-to, but the pins sit flatter, and I think sometimes when you have quite I want to say a drapier fabric like a viscose rayon, sometimes I find those clips are a little bit heavy. So here I am just checking everything through. I did stop and start my timer, and then I realised that there's places where I hadn't actually stopped it when I should have done. But my timing, which I'll tell you in a moment, is kind of accurate. So I will tell you how long it did take me and whether it did take me under 2 hours. But this is me just checking all the pieces and matching everything up. Front, that's a bit of a mess. Front leg, back leg. Front leg, back leg, pin. Okay, probably need to set my timer again. Oh, it's still running. Okay, so slightly messed up my times, but all in all, I saw on my timer roughly at the end was 55 minutes sewing time. So obviously I have the cutting out time to add to that. But although you could make these, I think the description in the book is accurate. I couldn't just cut these out and go like some people have to do. I had to make adjustments to the pattern before I started sewing them. So as you can see here, this is my toile, muslin, whatever you prefer. This is just made out of a calico, so it is quite stiff. And I've also realised that I have undone the crotch seam in places because it was giving me a wedgie. But if you look at the back, it dips down at the back. I do have a sway back, which is why I then added 1 inch of rise to the back so it wouldn't give me a wedgie and that it would sit higher up. I think the final trousers, which you'll see in a moment, do sit higher up, but they sit quite low. They sit lower than I thought they would. So I think it's just the sort of adjustment to the fact they're not sitting on my natural waist. They are lower, which actually I suppose is quite a good way of wearing them. I'm 5'3", so these do come out of a funny length, I would say. They don't go all the way to the ground. They're a little bit too short if you just want them as a full length trouser. These are unhemmed, so they would have a hem on them, so they would sort of swing just above. But for me, they wouldn't be short enough to have as crop trousers, which is why I then took extra fabric out, I think up to 3 inches, 2 to 2.5 to 3 inches out of the length. These are the final trousers. I do find there are drag lines, they are hitching. This is where I just critique everything and then go, oh, it's terrible. I think they're fine as a wearable muslin, but there are adjustments to be made. I feel at the front, not to draw attention to it, but I find that the fabric at the front crotch area is hanging funny, and I'm like, is it giving me camel toe vibes? I'm not sure. At the back, it's not as low as the original one. Big elasticator, it's quite nice. Not too tight on the elastic, so I can get them. I have a 10-inch difference to my waist and my hips, regardless of what size I am. Those proportions always remain the same. So they're not too tight on the waist, so I can't get them over my hips. The pockets are a bit odd, because as you can see, your hand naturally sits in the pocket one way, and then the pocket sort of drops down. So I guess it's good for holding pens and things, handy for when I go back to work, but a little bit uncomfortable to have your hand in there. Like I said, drag lines on the side, that could be down to the fabric and the overlocking. They just don't sit fantastically. So I think I do need to add a little bit to the front crotch. I don't know if they're giving me a wedgie at the back as well, despite that extra inch. So there are adjustments to be made. You can make them in under 2 hours. Are they perfect? Let you decide for yourself.